Video to introduce us to the features of trigonometric graphs. Sine and cosine functions have this appearance. Sine functions often start at 0 and then go up and down like this. Cosine functions start there, but cosine functions are really just a translation of sine functions in a horizontal direction. They're very similar looking graphs. If we look at this, we have some key points that we want to talk about and some key definitions that we want to go through. So the amplitude is the distance on a sine or cosine graph from the middle of the graph up to the max or to the min. So if we look here, here's the middle of the graph, and the amplitude is going to go from this point here up to the top, or from the middle of the graph down to the minimum. And as you can see here, that is the same distance. The distance from the middle to the max is the same as the distance from the middle to the minimum, because the graph is actually symmetrical over the x-axis in that way. So that's the amplitude. And then we can talk about the period, which is the horizontal distance between 2 points of the graph that exhibit exactly the same behavior. What do I mean by that? Well, this point here, you can see it's at 0, and this point's also at 0, and that point's also at 0, or if not at 0, on the middle line of the graph. But you will see here that this point goes up after being at 0, whereas this point goes down after being at 0. So I'd say that this point, which goes up, and this point, which is at the middle, goes up. They are the two that exhibit the same characteristics. They're the same point. They're the complete cycle. So one period is the horizontal distance for one complete cycle. So it's going to be the distance between those 2 points. Then we have the principal axis. So we talked about the amplitude and the period. Now we have the principal axis, and the principal axis is the center line of the graph. Often we see these graphs and they're sitting on the x-axis, so they're sitting symmetrically around the x-axis, but they don't have to be. That center of the graph could be higher. It could be at 2, and then the graph would just be positioned symmetrically around y equals 2. So the principal axis is this center line or midline of the graph, and it's often given by y equals something. Finally, we have something called a horizontal translation, and that's if you imagine an axis through here and say this point was 0, 0, and we had axes through there, we could start there, or we could move this graph over a bit and start it over here. And that would mean that we're actually horizontally translating the graph. So there's some characteristics of trigonometry.